Greetings and talofalawa from Samoa. My name is Chope Nivalu, and I will be the moderator for May we start our webinar, please? I will now invite the Director General, Mr. Liota. Kosilatu to deliver his welcome and opening remarks. Mr. Latu, please.
Chope Talofa. Good afternoon to everyone that's joining this webinar, either online or here present at the Climate Change Center here at SPREP. Today is the fourth week of the SPREP webinar series. The last 3-4 weeks we have focused on certain thematic areas, but today this webinar which is titled Environmental Consideration in Sustainable Tourism in the Pacific Region, is the fourth of this series, and it is organized by the Environmental Monitoring and Governance Program here at SPREP. So welcome everyone to our speakers. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to your participation in a couple of minutes. I understand that there are many other interested participants that are on their way. But just a few words from me in terms of this webinar. The main purpose of this webinar is to raise awareness on the importance of integrating environmental considerations in sustainable tourism planning through the use of environmental planning tools such as the regional EIA guidelines for coastal tourism. The SPREP strategic plan outlines a very important role by the Secretariat in terms of strengthening national sustainable development planning and implementation systems through, of course, the use of tools such as environmental impact assessments, strategic environmental assessments, and spatial planning. In 2018, SPREP partnered with the SPTO, and we're very pleased today. We appreciate your participation, Christina. Today, SPTO is a very important partner for SPREP, and in 2018, we developed the Environment Impact Assessment Guidelines for Coastal Tourism in the Pacific, and it's something that's already being used by several of our member countries and have provided very positive feedback and comment on the usefulness of those guidelines. The purpose of those guidelines are really to help and guide the tourism sector towards a better approach to environmental planning that will support tourism activities in a much more sustainable manner. It also will assist in raising awareness and understanding of the EIA process across the whole region, in particular the tourism sector. We hope that through this, we will be able to promote best practices in the coastal tourism development, and also encourage government agencies to use it and to support it. Our objective, of course, is to not just to raise awareness, but to actually encourage these tourism operators to use these tools, these very important tools in terms of the tourism sector here in the region. In these very challenging times, it is very important for us, of course, and our partners and our members to be aware of the importance of applying these planning tools, which are so important for us moving forward. For us, safeguarding the environment is everything. Our tourism is dependent on our environment. And so for us, it is critical that we do apply these important planning tools in our work with regards the protection of the environment and also sustainable tourism activities. I know Jope is going to introduce the speakers, so I'm
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Vinagabole, Director General SPREP, Mr. Leota Koshi Latu, for setting the scene for our Talanoa this afternoon. And we'll go straight into our presentation this afternoon. And the process is that I will be presenting, introducing the speakers as they take their turns in sharing with us the very, very interesting topics that they want to share with us this afternoon. And after the first two speakers, we will have a break for 5 minutes for us to receive 2 questions. And then after answering those 2 questions, then we'll complete the session with the other 2 speakers. And the first speaker this afternoon is from Australia, and his name is Dr. Gregory Barbara. And he is the Environment Assessment and Planning Officer. And I know that Mr. Barbara is not a new face to the region, and he will be speaking to us on the Environment Impact Assessment Guidelines for Coastal Tourism Development, as introduced by DG in his opening remarks. Let's invite Dr. Barbara to share with us his stories around this guideline. Dr. Barbara, please.
Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to all of you, wherever you may be listening. Thank you for joining this webinar. And thank you, Director General, for introducing the guidelines and mentioning their launch in 2018 with the Pacific Tourism Organization. Yes, the guidelines, the Environmental Impact Assessment Guidelines for Coastal Tourism Development and Pacific Island Countries and Territories. It's quite a mouthful, so I'll be referring to them simply as the Regional Coastal Tourism Guidelines or just the guidelines throughout my short talk. The objectives of these guidelines is twofold. Firstly, to assist tourism sector in the Pacific region to understand and better implement the environmental impact assessment process when they're developing their plans for the new developments. And secondly, to promote sustainable development in tourism. This is only a brief presentation. I'm not going to go into details about how you do an EIA or the guidelines themselves. Instead, I'm going to highlight some of the reasons, the key reasons why you conduct an EIA and the importance in the tourism sector, particularly during this time of global lockdown. They're still quite relevant. So when tourists come to the Pacific, they're often looking for cultural and environmentally friendly options for their holidays. Appropriate use of low impact attractions can be a drawcard for these types of holiday makers. The EIA process can help the developer to identify these environmentally sustainable options to help their development be more sustainable. You'll hear more on this from our presenter, Colin Phillips, later on when he talks about his own development. So the EIA process can also identify the key objectives of the project and the sensitive or iconic areas that you need to protect from impacts. It's not just about protecting the environment. By protecting the environment, coastal projects also benefit. Coral reefs, seagrass, mangroves, sand dunes, or beach areas all provide coastal protection to our islands. They improve water quality, attracting both marine life as well as tourists. Tourism developments and ventures need to protect these areas, not cause unintended impacts through increased demand for things such as fish for their restaurants, the souvenir trade, waste production, resource extraction for their building materials, or even poorly guided tours which can directly damage the coral reefs or the sensitive habitats associated with them. Within the Pacific, it's not uncommon for entire islands to be in the coastal zone itself, which is why these guidelines are called coastal tourism development, because most of the islands are within the coastal zone. Whole communities are therefore vulnerable to the climate change and disaster that happen in the Pacific because of this relationship with the sea. The EIA process not only considers impacts of development on the environment itself, but also considers the impacts of the environment on the development. Things such as climate change and natural disaster can be put into the consideration. These external impacts should be taken into account to help promote a more resilient development. Be it for a small or large scale development, EIA principles can still be applied. And because of small islands but large ocean states, Pacific Islanders are intrinsically linked to the coastal zone through our relationship with the sea, from the ridge to the reef and beyond. It's where we live, make our livelihoods, and root our culture. Culture and the environment are interwoven in the Pacific, and visitors are seeking these authentic experiences. Tourism can have a positive impact as well on preserving cultural knowledge and traditional skills. By properly conducting an EIA, you can integrate cultural knowledge and draw upon it to improve the outcomes of the development and the community that will operate in. Many of the traditional skills are actually being used in this time of lockdowns as people move back to their villages to support their families and find alternative sources of income where they would have normally been operating in the tourist sector. It's important we continue to support the use of cultural practices and emphasize how they can provide long-term sustainability of our resources. Now is not the time to raid the environment to fill our tables while tourism is in slowdown. Wait for my slide to come up. Thank you. Good coastal development take into account the interdependencies of activities and the environment. For example, wide-scale clearance of land for developments, cultivation, or forestry within a catchment area not only impacts the biodiversity in land areas and the access to these resources by traditional users, it can also lead to increased sediment loads and pollutants within our rivers. This reduction in water quality coming out of rivers has impacts on the marine habitats such as seagrass areas. I'm just using this as an example, but it could apply to many other habitats. While seagrass habitats are very good at improving water quality through nutrient processing and carbon cycling, they can't cope with large amounts of chemical runoff that comes from developed areas, such as pesticides, weedicides, and even hydrocarbons from our vehicles. Loss of seagrass areas due to pollutants can then impact on our fishing, turtles, dugongs, and fishing nurseries, as well as the coastal stability itself, all having impacts on other wider industries, not just tourism. If seagrass areas are removed or impacted by the development, the ecosystem function suffers. and the whole area suffers. Therefore, even if a tourism development is not specifically on the foreshore, it may still have a part to play in mitigating impacts to the marine environment. Development planning, therefore, and the operation of developments must consider these interplays in the environment, remembering we're all a part of the environment, we're not apart from it. So tourism brings us opportunities to the islands, but all developments also bring impacts. Some are more obvious than others, but all need to be managed. Waste management and pollution control remains one of the most pressing issues within the Pacific Islands. Tourism is dependent on a beautiful Pacific, so it's vital developments contribute to proper waste management. The EIA process can identify the likely impacts and the severity of these impacts to inform the creation of appropriate environmental management plans to mitigate the impacts, either by avoiding them altogether, through making better choices for what items we use and how we bring in materials, as well as minimizing impacts. We have to remember the EIA process at its core is a planning process or a tool. It's not an approvals document as most people like to think of it. The objective of an EIA is to prevent and mitigate undue harm to people and their natural environment and lead to a sustainable development. It's not a roadblock to development, it's to promote sustainable development. It aims to avoid highly impacted environments that leave developments vulnerable to the forces of nature, minimize the reliance on hard engineering solutions, and promote developments that work with the environment and support ecosystems to maintain ecosystem function. I ask you, of these three developments that we've depicted here, which one would you prefer to visit? Tourism developments may be privately funded or government initiatives or even donor driven, but all are subject to the same laws that govern within each EIA process within countries. It's important that while we strive to keep the island economies going during lockdown, we don't forget this and the importance of long-term sustainable planning. If the environmental management plans are properly developed and implemented during construction and the operation of our developments and our tourism sectors, coastal developments can lead to actual improved environmental outcomes, such as retention of cultural knowledge, improved water quality and coastal stability through integration of sustainable cultural practices, better waste management and erosion control. With good planning, tourism can bring benefits to all parties, not just the tourism sector. You've heard me speak about the importance of sustainable planning for developments. While the regional coastal tourism EIA guidelines are aimed at assisting back? Okay, thank you. Sorry for that technical interruption. I just wanted to remind you that SPREP is the premier environmental program, is here to assist our members. We're continuing to provide EIA capacity building support virtually during these lockdowns through virtual workshops, video conferencing calls, technical reviews, and the Pacific Network of Environmental Assessment, which is an online forum for registered users in the Pacific to discuss and share environmental assessment experiences and knowledge. The EIA process really relies on good stakeholder interaction and utilizing appropriately skilled people. So be sure to reach out for technical support and advice when you're planning your development. For further information, please visit the SPREP website and make contact with Joppe and myself. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Craig, for sharing with us the importance of this guideline, which I'm holding in front of you. So as shared by Craig, please get connected to the SPREP website where you can get accessible to this guideline and also to this afternoon. And again, sincere apologies from SPREP because there has been some interruptions to the internet connection from this end. Yes, our second speaker this afternoon is Ms. Christina Leala Ngale. And Ms. Christina is the Sustainable Tourism Development Manager for the South Pacific Tourism Organization, which is currently based in Suva. And her topic of this afternoon is on environment sustainability, a key building block for sustainable tourism in the region. Tina, please take the floor and do your presentation to us and to the audience. Thank you.
Naka Jope, can you guys hear me? Yes. Okay. Presentation, please. Okay, so thank you very much. Talo falava pulavinaka, greetings from Suva. Yeah, moriatule fatalo fa man fa malo ilipa yama malo sa mom fa yona mawata to pokalamenia so malo lavle so for mawa malangi ma. So from my presentation today, I'd like to first off thank SPREP for inviting SBTO as well as our colleagues from the tourism sector. Thank you so much, Leota and your team, because we see great value in talking about the importance of the environment to sustainable tourism development in the Pacific. And so we're very happy to be here today. And my presentation very briefly touches on, some of the key points that we want to raise. Of course, for the benefit of our stakeholders who don't know SBTO, I'll talk a little bit about SBTO, the sustainable tourism concept and what it means for us in the Pacific. Then I'll be looking at the environmental sustainability progress in tourism for the Pacific. What are the challenges, the opportunities, and how do we look at tourism post-COVID-19? Next slide, please. So for SBTO, next slide, please. We are an intergovernmental organization that's based in Suva, Fiji. So we are mandated to market and develop tourism in the Pacific. So we have 20 Pacific Island member countries and over 140 private sector members. But we do work across all groups and stakeholders, including NGOs. the core functions of SBTO, the strategic areas of focus, for the next 5 years is around tourism marketing. That's marketing of the Pacific as a tourism destination, research and statistics, and sustainable tourism planning and development. So before I continue with my presentation, I thought to highlight, what the tourism offering really is. Next slide, please. When we look at tourism, we'd like to, for the benefit of all our stakeholders who are here, to think of tourism as an experience and an offering that really highlights 3 core assets, and that's our people, our environment, and our culture. And so you can see there the importance and the critical role of the environment in the tourism offering for the Pacific Islands. And so in terms of our marketing campaigns that actually go out to market, next slide, please. We're looking at really promoting the regional brand of ours is yours. So what we have and what we value as Pacific Islands is what we would like our tourists or our clients that are coming to the Pacific to also value. And here's an example of, one of those campaigns where we say, our islands, environment, and culture are yours to discover, experience, and respect. And I think respect is very critical. Next slide, please. To how we look at, the development of tourism, both internally when we, really want to ensure that we develop tourism, but we also respect the environments that we depend on, as the Director General of SPREP had mentioned earlier. So that's very key, but also when we're looking outwards to the markets and to our visitors, we'd like to demand the same. And so it's very, very critical for us to be, coming together and understanding that we are not here to demand respect from the visitors, but, we are not walking the talk as, people of the Pacific or host countries or tourism businesses. So that's very key. And then one key area that I wanted to talk about today, next slide, please, my SPREP IT. I'd like to talk about the concept of sustainable tourism development, because this is very crucial in terms of how we understand what we are talking about. Now, we at SBTO and across the membership look at sustainable development of tourism as the type of tourism that really takes full account of not only our current, but also the future impacts on the economy, on the people and culture, and the environment. So all those impacts we have to be accountable for. On the other side, we would like to see that tourism, because it is an economic sector, is delivering on the benefits that it promises everyone. And so by that, we see sustainable tourism as an opportunity to also address the needs of our visitors, our industry, our environment, and our host communities. So that's very important. And I think what's also very important for us to understand when we're saying sustainable tourism, we're not looking for, a formula or a measure that we can say, okay, yes, you can stop there, we are now sustainable. No, it's a journey, and it's all about all of us working together. It's part of a process, and it requires a lot of patience, a lot of support and commitment from everyone, and time. And so when we're talking about sustainable tourism, we're actually, thinking of a pathway that will lead to excellence down the line. So, to achieve our goals. And so again, as, part of the EIA process, really helps us improve as we go. And that's the same with sustainable tourism, or trying to achieve sustainability in the tourism sector. So we have to ensure that we meet the economic requirements, the social cultural requirements or aspirations, as well as the environmental aspirations and requirements. So what is environmental sustainability? What does it look like for tourism in the Pacific? Can you go back one slide, please? I think, yes, thank you. So for us in the Pacific, when we're talking about tourism, we'd like to stress the fact that it's important not to lose sight of the fact that tourism only happens when we have clients, or when we have visitors, or when we have a market that actually comes here. And so we have consumers. So it's a people industry where people are catering for the needs of other people. And so, and the preferences are very different and very diverse for millions of people around the world. So it's really hard to please everyone. And so, but the good news is we're seeing the research, and it affirms that people are looking for environmentally responsible experiences, culturally rich experiences, new experiences, and very unique and authentic experiences, which really nicely ties in everything together that we're talking about when we're thinking of sustainable tourism sector. And so that's important. And also looking at the fact that people are no longer looking for pampering, but rather they want to be immersed in the experience. And so that's very critical when we're looking at the supply side and what we can offer our visitors when coming to our islands. So again, it's important for us to look at that aspect when we're also looking at how we develop tourism. Next slide, please. So what are we doing in terms of environmental sustainability? So really focusing on the environmental aspect of tourism. These are some of the initiatives that we have already started, and these are the key ones. There's many other things that we're doing on the side as well, but I thought to highlight, and I'd like to congratulate SPREP for the leadership in putting together the Coastal Tourism EIA guidelines for the Pacific. And again, I'd like to really encourage our tourism stakeholders at government level, private sector, NGOs, to really support our government and the private sector in implementing the EIA guidelines. Although we also can see it's a process, and we will journey together to achieve the goal that we want in terms of environmental sustainability. But it's a great partnership, and SPTO and our Pacific Island countries have worked so hard with SPREP over the last how many years to put this together. So this is a really great tool for, and especially now when we're looking at COVID-19 and the impacts on the tourism sector. The other initiatives in terms of environmental sustainability that we are working towards, looking at, really managing the waste generated from tourism in the Pacific. Some of them are highlighted here. For example, efforts with SPREP to reduce our contribution to the marine litter problem, tackling plastic waste. But also at the moment, we're discussing how we can also help green the operations of the cruise industry in the Pacific. So those are really good aspirations, and we'd like to continue down that path. And it's very important for our destinations to also be doing the same. In terms of the marine ecotourism, we're in the process of developing those guidelines with the SPREP team as well, but also in consultation with our private sector and the niche marine tourism operators. who are on the ground experiencing and delivering such products and experiences. Importantly, we're also working on how we can manage and measure the contribution and the impacts of tourism. Now, we're still in the early stages, and we're looking at starting with the accommodation sector at the moment. So we cannot say that we are environmentally responsible in the tourism sector right now, because we simply do not have the evidence. That's one thing. And there's different people doing really great things, and we also have really bad experiences in the Pacific. So I think holistically, we need to be working towards improving how we monitor and manage our impacts and on the environment. And then the last one that I wanted to highlight today is the importance of us working together in climate proofing the tourism sector. It's so exposed to climate change impacts, to environmental impacts, to disasters and so forth. And so we're starting off with a program or project proposal that will help build the climate resilience of our small island states, and then working from there. So those are some of the key initiatives that we are looking at the moment, keeping in mind that SPTO's tourism program is still very new. We just started 3 years ago in 2017, but we look forward to working with the environmental sector, but also all the other sectors in how we progress, you know, a lot of these things, and also what's very key at national level. Next slide, please. So what are the challenges? I think that's one important area that we need to be talking about. So the first one, yeah, we can look at the lack of, you know, legislations and, you know, the regulatory frameworks, you know, that governs how we do business responsibly in the tourism sector. I think for most countries, we have those in place for the environmental sector. Some or, you know, most of our national tourism offices in their legislations, we do not have anything that really holds them accountable to the impacts the tourism sector has on the environment. So that's one area that we really need to improve on. There's also, on the other side, the lack of coordination in terms of enforcement of, you know, environmental policies and regulations that we do have in the Pacific. And yes, simply because we do not have the resources and the capacity at national level to do so. The other one is also looking at the standards that we need to be setting in the tourism sector for all our businesses, and also across the public sector as well. Secondly, in the area of tourism business planning, I think that's where some of the challenges lie, because some operators, for them, environmental sustainability is probably an add-on after the business has been set up. We'd like to see that, you know, every single business, you take this on at the very beginning of the planning process. And so that's why we're really enforcing that and really emphasizing the need to work together at that very early stage of development. But maybe also on the other hand, we should be looking at whether there's support for the private sector, whether there's enough support for the private sector to fully understand the environmental guidelines and regulations that are currently in place in our countries. But it has to translate, you know, down to the business community and those who are aspiring to go into tourism businesses. And so the need for collaboration and working together between the tourism sector and the environmental sector in all of our countries is a challenge, and one that we really need to address in moving forward. I mentioned earlier the need for opportunities and trainings. This is not, you know, with regards to how EIAs are implemented or enforced within the environmental sector, But, you know, for those of us aspiring operators who are thinking of entering into tourism businesses, that opportunity to fully understand and have the right skills to integrate environmental sustainability into our planning process is very crucial. And I mentioned before the challenge that we have with data. Currently, we cannot report on environmental sustainability of the tourism sector. You may have noted from, you know, when we talk about the performance of tourism, it's all economic indicators at the moment. So how many visitors are coming to our islands, how many nights, how long they're staying in our countries, where they come from, probably their contribution to the economy. And so that's probably, you know, to the extent that we go to in terms of reporting about the performance of tourism. We don't have anything yet on, you know, how we're doing in the environmental sustainability aspect, and we would like to aspire to change that in the future and improve on that. Next slide, please. And so there comes opportunities for us to consider as well. And definitely the EIA is the first opportunity that we have here. I'd like to focus on that because it is a really good tool for development. And the opportunity is there for us to really collaborate and see how we can support the private sector. And private sector is so diverse as well. We've got the big operations, and then we've got SMEs. We need to be looking at, you know, the sizes and scales of developments and try and support our private sector and how we can integrate these considerations into the planning process. The second one that I wanted to talk about today is the Sustainable Tourism Framework. So we are looking at, in the next few months, COVID-19 has presented us with the golden opportunity to really put our house in order first. And so we're developing a regional sustainable tourism framework that will hopefully guide regional coordination in terms of how we look at developing sustainable tourism in the Pacific. Definitely, we will be consulting with the environmental sector in this aspect, and would like your feedback on how we can, you know, make sure all the key considerations on environmental sustainability are included. A third one is on stakeholder engagement and awareness. And I cannot stress that enough because at destination level, at regional level, we cannot do things in silo. We cannot afford to do things on our own. And so there has to be, you know, a better way for us to work together. And I think that's key in moving forward. Which really means we need to be looking at partnerships that really drive sustainable tourism development. So partnerships at all levels, small, medium, or really big, you know, partnerships with a lot of funding and support. But really, we need the partnerships that will make a difference, and not just partnerships that will give us the money, because it's beyond money, it's beyond, you know, financing. I think it has to start from within and making that change to really value the natural resources that tourism depends on. And so I'm talking about all of us making that difference. And then lastly, I'd like to highlight, like I mentioned before, post-COVID-19, we need to look back at the lessons that the pandemic has presented the sector. We are at ground zero at the moment. But it's a golden opportunity that we need to learn from. And so we look forward to exchanging information and ideas, lessons learned from different countries in the region, so we can, you know, build our environmental sustainability as a Pacific destination. Next slide, please. I think, yeah, some last messages that I wanted to highlight today. It's all about, you know, us looking at a new normal after post-COVID-19. And we will have to come back stronger, more sustainable, and more resilient as a sector. And that's an aspiration from us at regional level. And I'm sure it's, you know, across the region as well. But also looking at the new normal, a new vision for not only a safer Pacific, but a better Pacific in terms of tourism development. And we have to be keeping in mind that, we cannot isolate the environment from the economic, recovery process. We are placing sustainability at the heart of the recovery process. And so we do look forward to a post-COVID-19 tourism sector that really looks at the health of the people and the environment whilst thriving, in the economic space, or looking at really growing sustainably in terms of, economic returns for the region. So I'll finish it there for now, and I'm really happy to respond to any questions. So thank you very much, SPREP, for the opportunity.
An excellent presentation from you, and you raise a lot of very, very important points. And I would like to pick on two that you emphasize on. That is the importance of environment impact assessment as a tool to support decision making. And you also raised the excellent work you're doing in developing the regional sustainable tourism framework. I think for our audience listening in today and our partners, they will be looking forward to contribute to the development of that important policy document for tourism. We'll take two questions now. Colleagues, we are so happy that, yes, lots of questions are coming our way. So I have two already, which I would like to ask the two regional organizations who presented. The first one is to SPREP. The question is, a lot of tourism development activities occur along the coast in many Pacific Island countries. To protect this investment from the impacts of sea level rise, what are some of the environment practices or measures that could be implemented to mitigate such impacts? SPREP, please.
Thank you, Jope. Okay, that's a good question. And as I mentioned, potentially a difficult one as well, because of the fact that the interplay between the coastal zone within all of our islands. Ideally, we would locate our developments in areas where they are less prone to sea level rise, or they can be better protected from sea level rise and our climate change impacts. We don't always have that opportunity in some of our very low-lying islands. There are things we can do to work with the environment, preserving our coastal habitats such as seagrass and coral reefs, and where we have them, mangroves, because they do attenuate waves and the more severe impacts. And then there's, of course, areas of policy as well for zoning areas. If we can identify areas that are most likely to be flooded in coming years with sea level rise, or more prone to king tides. Government policies can go a long way to doing that. We can plan ahead, but also with developers themselves, having that in mind when they're planning about selecting the appropriate site and the practices for how they design the development to fit with the environment they're working with.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Craig, for that answer. And I think listening to Tina's presentation, she emphasized the importance of for government establishing or strengthening existing policies in order to safeguard sustainable development within our region. And our question number two goes to Christina. The question reads, Tina, that tourism is one of the main sources of revenue for most Pacific Island countries. However, with the COVID-19, the tourism industry has been significantly impacted. The question is, how can SPTO assist countries and the industry to build back better while working towards achieving sustainable development and environmental sustainability? Thank you, Tina.
Vinaka Jope, I feel like I'm, in a beauty pageant. Thank you for the question. Just wanted to, be a little bit more informal here. But thank you so much. That's a very key question. And, I'd like to acknowledge the fact that we are in this process together. We're all in this together. And so with SBTO as well, we're working through our member countries and our private sector members. And we are doing a lot of listening. And I think that's very key to be able to come out very strong and resilient in the future. We have to be understanding as well and reflecting more on what's happening. We can't afford to be rushing back to reopening, although we do recognize the fact that, businesses are hurting and they want to get back on their feet. And, with the way things are going, we need to really be talking to each other. And so we're doing a lot of dialogue with our national tourism offices. So we're re-engaging our board of directors level and really looking at what the impacts are. I think it's too early to draw a very concrete, conclusion about what's happening in the sector right now. But we do look forward to supporting the recovery process through initiating partnerships that will hopefully take us to a really sustainable post-COVID-19 tourism sector. And so next week on Wednesday, we are launching a very exciting partnership, and that's with the Travel Foundation, which is a international NGO that has been working around the world in terms of maximizing benefits from tourism, whilst maintaining, and safeguarding communities and the environment. So we're very selective in the way we approach our partners, and at the moment, we have to be understanding the impact of COVID-19 on the sector. For example, we're doing a National Tourism Office needs assessment. So that information is coming in. We've also been doing a lot of surveys. Our partners are also working on other surveys of the private sector. And so we're collecting that information, and hopefully from there we can design programs of support that will contribute to reviving the sector going forward. And so I'd just like to highlight that, it will look like for us, we would like to see a tourism sector that's more resilient and more sustainable after COVID-19, and it'll require the support from everyone. And so for SBTO, we are open to receiving feedback. Even if you're not a private sector member of SBTO, we're opening up to feedback and recommendations from around the region on how we can better support the recovery process. We've had a donor roundtable last week. We're also talking to our donors and our development partners and crop agencies on how we can work together, building on existing programs that we have at the moment. So yes, thank you so much, Sprep, for the question. And I'd love to respond to any further questions during the session today. Thank you.
Away, and we are so happy. Please, colleagues and audience, don't go away because we will be listening to two other very interesting speakers. And the next speaker will be Mr. Colin Phillip. I know Colin Phillip from a long way back in Fiji. And yes, he is currently the manager of this beautiful Lelovia Island Resort. And also, Mr. Phillip is the co-chair of the Duavata Sustainable Tourism Collective. And his topic this afternoon will be on the usefulness of environmental planning on tourism development. We'll now invite Mr. Phillip to share his Talanoa with us this afternoon. Mr. Phillip, please.
Chope, and firstly, just like to thank the Director General of SPREP, Mr. Kosi Latu, for inviting me to be part of this panel. Presentation. I just wanted to, can we go to slide 2, please? Can we go to the next slide? All right, I just wanted to first introduce the Duavata Sustainable Tourism Collective. So we're a group of tourism operators who decided to get together share ideas, collaborate, and generally assist each other with everyday concerns and barriers we face in running a tourism operation in Fiji. We also felt as a group we would have a bigger voice when it comes to policy, lobbying for policy change in Fiji. And yeah, that's why we got together and formed the Duovata Sustainable Tourism Collective. That's our website. Next slide, please. So we're a collective of like-minded operators who all share the same vision for tourism in Fiji. Because our members are spread out and mostly in remote locations, we're still able to collect our views and voice them through our secretary, Marita Manley, who has an office in Suva. As tourism operators, we have recognized the importance of the interconnection between these three pillars: our local community, the environment, and culture and heritage. I think Christina also touched on this. One thing we all have as Duovata members in common is that these three pillars are very much a part of the experience we offer our guests. We have not created an artificial environment or a concrete jungle for our guests. We are using everything around us, God-given gifts to help create the guest experience. So we actually have conservation and sustainability built into our everyday operations. And this is key to our business model. It is what sets us apart from our competition, and it is what draws visitors to our shores. We're very fortunate in the Pacific to have a strong connection between traditional knowledge and conservation. So there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. Tourism can help fund and rejuvenate these traditional conservation practices that have been proven over centuries, practices that have ensured the Pacific still has a tourism industry today. Can we have the next slide, please? So we champion the interconnection between experiences within local communities, the environment and culture. I just wanted to share a couple of web links that shows what our neighbors in Australia and New Zealand are doing. So the next slide, please. So this is what, this is a link to the Australian Sustainable Tourism Guidelines. And then the next slide. This is a link to New Zealand's sustainability commitment for tourism. And then the next slide, please. So I put this slide up because industry goals 7 and 8, I thought these goals were important because they talk about not just about the impact on the environment, but also ecological restoration, measuring, managing, and minimizing our environmental footprint. So the next slide. So this is from the EIA guidelines from the Fiji Department of Environment. So one of my pet arguments about EIAs, I think Christina has heard me say this before, is that EIAs generally or invariably become a rubber stamp for developers to do what they want. Craig also mentioned this in his talk. Once the EIA is approved, we see very little desire to monitor or control the impact on the environment. We have many examples of this in Fiji. A few years ago, Little Bay Island Resort got involved in the SPTO Sustainable Monitoring Program. I believe this program is very important and it needs substantial investment from the forum island countries to ensure we have a Pacific-wide program in place to help gauge the impact tourism has on our ocean and on our environment. I promise Christina didn't ask me to say that. I believe this will be key in maintaining a sustainable tourism industry. So the last slide 8, please. So as an industry, we must contribute positively to enhancing, restoring, maintaining, and most of all, monitoring our day-to-day operations as a tourism operation. In conclusion, as the saying goes, rules are made to be broken. Enforcement has always been and always will be an issue in our developing economies. So as an industry, it is important that operators recognize the need to maintain a strong moral and ethical connection to the environment. And by this environment, I mean our people and our culture included in that. Inaka.
Philip, and you raised a very good point from the industry point of view, the element of monitoring. And I do hope that there will be lots of questions coming up after the session where how we can get the industries take part or be involved in monitoring of their developments and how it impacts the existing environment. And thank you too for sharing, introducing the Duavata Sustainable Tourism Collective. I do hope that some of the audience will want to know what Duavata means. Is it a Samoan language or Tongan language or Fijian language? So maybe in the question and answer sessions, we'll invite you, Colin, to elaborate more what Duavata means. And yes, audience, we have the final speaker for the day. And he's a very close colleague of SPREP. And his name is Fa'ama Tuainu Suifua. And he is currently the Chief Executive Officer for the Samoa Tourism Authority. And his topic he'll be speaking on the role of National Tourism Office in promoting environmental planning on tourism development. It is also interesting, colleagues, audience, to listen from the sector perspective on how they are managing tourism in a country perspective. Let's hear from the CEO himself. Thank you.
Thank you, Jope, for the kind introduction. I believe that you actually pronounced my name correctly. Also, I'd like to acknowledge the Director General and also the team here at SPTO, as well as our audience. I believe I'm the final presenter. So, benefit of being the final presenter is that your presentation would be very brief, as your other presenters already mentioned some of the key areas. And also, given that I'll be the last one, so my 15 minutes will actually go up to 30 minutes. So I thank you in advance for that.
Thank you very much, sir.
Yes. All right. Believe that my topic would be the one that's already on the screen. And given that this is a really great opportunity for the tourism sector to actually to be involved when it comes with environment, as well as especially with the COVID-19. I know that the presenters from SPREP, as per the first presenter, as well as Tim has already mentioned, the EIA KIT tool, as well as sustainable tourism at the regional level, I still believe that there's a lot can be done. We can still merge and marry these two big organizations so that the benefit can be actually filtered down to the national tourism level. So my presentation today, I will actually debate it amongst myself that either I will speak or actually based on the presentation, so that if I speak it will be 30 minutes, but if it's the presentation would be within the time limit, so I'll try my best to actually touch on that. So
Thank you.
aloha from beautiful Samoa to the Pacific. I know that it's a vast ocean, but we are of the same Pacific, given the migration back in the days. So aloha to our colleagues from Fiji, as well as some of the presenters. Believe that when it comes to sustainability and tourism, we need to actually dissect the terms so that we can actually understand and better know the difference between tourism and sustainability. And I believe that for the actual touch base on presentation on NTO from the NTO level, just wanted to touch on the minor definition that we've been using for sustainability. And I know it's from the 1987 report on the World Commission. It actually looks at sustainable tourism as a development that actually current without affecting the needs for the future generation. And that is the same that we could actually used for the sustainable tourism at the moment. Gone are the days that people actually look at tourism as just the marketing, just the beautiful faces, everything. Nowadays, tourism is everything. If you put together into a machine the economics, the social, as well as the other benefits, the first one that comes out of tourism actually touch base, cuts through all the sectors in the social as well as the economics and environment. So it's actually a really important topic when it comes to tourism. And I know that Tin has already mentioned the benefits of tourism at the regional level. And nowadays, everyone is talking about tourism, tourism, tourism. But there's a lot that can be done so we can actually achieve sustainability. And one of the key areas that SPRIP has already developed 4 years ago, really 2 years ago, in terms of the toolkit, in terms of towards sustainable tourism. But some of the thoughts that comes to mind when we actually talk about the EIA, is it a tool that actually delay the inevitable? Is it an expensive tool, or it's just a tool that will actually see how we actually utilizes the resources that competes between the tourism and the other sectors within the governments, and as well as within the national level and also at the regional level. These are some of the key questions that always comes to mind when we actually talk about tourism. And I believe that when it comes to the Pacific, tourism is the word. Everyone actually talks about tourism and its benefits. And I believe that the tourism is actually been limited to just the economics. We've actually thoroughly discussed its benefits in terms of the social, the impacts on the lives from every facet of communities, and also in terms of the environments. I believe that when it comes to tourism, we have a really added value to all the initiatives that have actually been developed. So in a nutshell, tourism, given the importance, a lot of resources as well as attention by the national governments and also our government towards developing this service sector. And given the dreadful events that we've been actually experienced, starting from the measles, and then we've actually went straight to the COVID, as well as other economic factors, I believe that Samoa is the most affected in the Pacific when it comes to the pandemic. And our impact started from last year compared to the impact as experienced by some of the other fellow countries. So overall, impact of tourism in Samoa is quite severe, and it's actually a really good opportunity to actually use this forum to discuss some of the issues, the concerns, which actually relate to sustainability as well as today's main topic. So for the first slide, that already mentioned the benefits of the tourism. Back in the days, back in the 90s, agriculture used to be the pillar of the economy. And then we have the 2 tropical cyclones that actually affected the economy. And then tourism started back then, back in the early 90s. And given the ability of tourism to actually recover straight after a natural cyclone, as well as the ability to actually impact in every life in the community in terms of the social and economic, tourism actually becoming, and actually it's still the pillar, as also the backbone of the economy. So up to March this year, we've actually looked at the development of tourism and actually in its benefits to the economy of Samoa. So if you look at the numbers for the last 10 years, we've actually brought in almost 4 billion tala in terms of the economic value. And then the rate of increase from every financial year, every year actually grew by more than 7%. So up to last year, we've actually exceeded $500 million mark. And that is one of the highlights, one of the milestones in terms of the developed tourism. And after that, then we hit by the measles. So measles impact, everyone actually aware of when we actually been affected by the measles. And straight after the measles, we've actually been double hit by the COVID-19. And the threat at the moment is the uncertainty of when this will actually have a certain outcome for us. So the development of tourism, in a nutshell, as I mentioned before, when it comes to the economics, when it comes to the development of the product, starting from the accommodations, attraction sites, all the support services actually grew in the last 10 years. And that actually brings the highlights and actually indicative of how important the sector in itself for the last years is actually contributed to 25% to 30% of the GDP, 15% of the workforce, and a third towards the foreign reserves. So you can see the importance of tourism when it comes to the national level. Slide on. So I believe that I already mentioned the overall picture in terms of the economics, as well as the importance of the contribution from the industry towards the national level as well as the community level. So an overview of sustainable tourism, as I mentioned, I believe that Tina has already mentioned that. And I know that given the SDGs by the UN, it's one of the key impacts, the key life changer in terms of providing economic growth, as well as the all certain matters that's actually been related to environment, life below water, as well as some of the key SDGs that's actually been promoted. And given the increase in tourism, now we can't emphasize the effects on the environment. And I know that this will actually address the issues, the tools that's actually been mentioned by a fellow colleagues that actually presented prior. So in terms of that, the government has already prioritized sustainable tourism, and that leads to actually developing the tourism sector plan. So at the moment, some tourism authority working with the sector is actually having, is actually collecting the data for the new sector plan, and we've actually entailed and included all the sustainable as well as the environment factors, so that once the plan is finished, we're going to change it from the tourism sector plan to a sustainable tourism plan. So that would be the new plan for the tourism sector to actually emphasize. Once we talk about sustainability, we have to make the actions rather than just the focus. We have to see and then brief and eat the terms when it comes to its benefits. So we've actually mentioned in terms of the regional scale as well as the government level in terms of sustainable tourism. And in the government sector plan, the SDS, tourism is one of the key economic drives by the government to actually assist in terms of all facets of the across the board. So for Samoa Tourism Authority, as I mentioned before, we're not just doing the Te Wheeler Festival, the Miss Samoa pageants, the marketing. We actually do more than that. We have a division in terms of we have the planning and development division that actually looks into the policies as well as the regulations, and working with the government, the intra-government level, so that we can actually ensure that what's been set at the regional level is actually being funneled down and being implemented at the government level. So under the planning and development division, they're actually mandated to actually ensure that any tourism-related development has to actually adhere to all the government regulations under MNRE before any development. Just to give an example of that, if you want to build an accommodation, anything that actually relates to tourism, actually need to have an EIA. And I know that I will touch on the EIA later on, but that is one of the key criteria for any tourism development to actually, before they actually go towards any developments, an EIA has to be done. So I believe that at the start, that I actually mentioned the EIA in terms of some of the key thoughts that I know that at the grassroots level, when it comes to the EIA, I know that a lot of cases has been done in New Zealand in terms of the RMA. And this is one of the key issues that from an NGO is that having a sustainable tool, kit through EIA process, the thing that we need to actually look at is the cost. It's one of the things, one of the impediments towards the development of sustainable tourism is looking at the cost of having EIA, as well as some of the delays. And also, if we actually look at the EIA, it's a matter of actually whether we are looking at minimizing the impacts or delaying the inevitable through the next generation. So these are just some of the thought-provoking thoughts when it comes to the AIA. So here we actually at the government level. So here we have the government tool, which is we have the EIA under the Puma. And under the Puma, I know that it's one of the challenges for Puma in terms of the development when it comes to the manpower as well as the capacity and also the monitoring of some of the developments. I know that I understand that when it comes to our EIA, there are a lot of areas that we need to actually look into. One of the key challenges, whether it's the challenges, but it's the ownership of the land in Samoa. EIA, in our experience, it actually works well when it comes to the freehold lands. When it comes to the government, to the customary lands, we have the challenges right over there. I believe that Puma did, the government did a planning project at Vaitele 5 years ago and actually went well, because Vaitele is actually freehold land. When it comes to the customary lands, here we have a certain bit of a challenge. Not only that in terms of the ownership of the customary land, but the limited resources that we have. Tourism actually needs better attraction site when it comes to reserves, waterfalls, beaches. We have the Electric Power Corporation wanting hydropower. We have other developments that actually looks at farming. They need to clear the forest, other sort of development. So here we have sort of a toss in terms of having the development of sustainable tourism. So within our own backyard, there are challenges that we need to actually address. For an example, we have the Elefanga. There's Liwa Biosina, which is one of, in terms of historical, it's one of the key river in terms of hiking as well as swimming. And then there is proposed development of hydropower at Elefanga. And here we have a challenge in terms of sustainable tourism, whether we go with the hydropower, whether we actually have to look at the economic benefits or having the sustainable tourism development at Elefanga. So here are some of the examples that I can actually come up with for the classic example of sustainable tourism and having challenges with customary lands as well as with other government sectors. For the Planning and Development Division, we mentioned the EIA as well as that. So we also have the accommodation minimum standards. So the accommodation minimum standards actually looks at the criteria, more than 100 plus standards criteria for any accommodation to actually comply with. If you do not comply with that, we will not issue a license. We will turn down the application for tourism. And that toolkit is actually, it's been implemented by other key government agency, and it's one of the key ones that we've been using for the last 10 years. So at the meantime, we've actually reviewed the minimum standards, and then Samoa will actually enter the star rating phase in the near future. But the key purpose of having minimum standards is actually to control, regulate, and monitor the state of the developments across the sector. Not only at the development at the when they first started the phase, but during the implementation, we also have to monitor the standard as well as the quality. But throughout the year, continuous monitoring. This is one of the key challenges. I believe that it's starting off the project and the ability to actually sustain it, to actually ensure that the products, the belief, as well as the delivery of the promise of having a quality product is actually maintained. So what are some of the sustainable tourism initiatives projects that the Samoa Tourism Authority has been implementing for the last years? I believe that one of the marketing tool that everyone's been reading around across the Pacific is the Global Sustainable Tourism Council. It's one of the accredited sustainable tourism program across the world that actually carry out stock take all the policies as well as the products within a country if they actually comply. So Samoa was the first in the Pacific 6 years ago that actually comply with the sustainable tourism indicators. And this is one of the key areas. So not only that we actually comply in terms of sustainable environment, but having that tool is actually another marketing for the Samoa tourism to actually promote that Samoa is one of the best place to come and have relaxation, adventure. But at the meantime, it's one of the environment-friendly destinations. So this is one of major developments, a major 6 years ago, and we're still maintaining the status quo of the sustainable tourism by the GGSTC. So sustainability monitoring program. Believe that Tina has already touched on the sustainability program. We did a pilot study for around 7 or 8 properties in Samoa, having actually to look at the cost as well as the amount they consume, starting from the water, the electricity, the waste management. And the good thing that we've actually obtained from that is that this is one of the key industries that actually consumes a lot of energy and actually produce a lot of waste as well as consumption of water. For example, one of the hotels, the electricity bill for a month is actually 40 grand. And that's actually give us the amount that not only the industry actually contributes to the economic, but we see that actually takes from the environment. So this is one of the key measurement tools that we can actually utilize in terms of future planning, is having, as mentioned by Tina, is having that information, the quantitative data, to actually ensure once we breach and once we actually go forward and reach sustainable tourism, we need to actually have the right information, the stats to actually back us up. The second one is the climate change adaptation projects. So this was funded 3 years ago. Tourism is one of the key impacts from the threats of climate change, and that especially along the coastal areas. I believe that the majority of beach valleys, other operators along the low flat areas, and when it comes to climate change, you've seen the impacts of coastal erosion, and also relates to the question that been asked by one of the presenters. What are some of the key areas that the tourism sector is actually looking to addressing the coastal erosion as well as some of the key climate change areas? Of course, we've done the zoning, but the challenge with zoning, people would actually have a difficult time of actually moving to the other side of the road or moving on another land. That's one of the key difficult ones. We have the SIM plans, and I know that the SIM plans actually from A to Z actually looks at moving or actually relocating of not only the households but also the tourism sector. But that was a difficult one in terms of if you move your beach valley across the road, that would actually you lost your in terms of your marketing edge, because the marketing that we actually preach overseas at beach valley, right under your footstep, you have the beach and then you swim. But if you move across the road, then that would be a different message. And in terms of that, we had a difficulty in terms of the zonation. The positive one from the climate change adaptation is that if you look at Manasseh, Manasseh was one of the worst hits in terms of sand erosion as well as coastal degradation. And the building of the offshore islands as well as the rehabilitation of the sand actually looked at it's actually working. That was funded under the adaptation fund, and that was one of the successful projects that tourism and the environment actually work together to ensure that we actually save the beaches. But in terms of the economic value, economic businesses for the tourism at Manasseh is actually still continuing at the moment. During the GEF project under the UN, we've actually looked in not only the coastal areas, but building climate proofing of beach valleys, as well as climate proofing shelters for the beach operators, only for Upolu, but also for Savai'i. As you've seen that we've actually improved the product. The only downturn for us was just we're only limited to certain areas due to financial resources. So I believe this is a report as well as asking the assistance from any donor that this project actually works, that we can actually ensure the sustainability in terms of the livelihoods as well as one of the key economic drivers in our economy. As I mentioned before, we've actually reviewed the accommodation standards, and I cannot emphasize more the importance of having standards to actually guide. And the standards actually it's actually been guided by the acts as well as the regulations of some of the key government agencies, starting from the MNRE, PUMA, the building code, as well as the FISA and health. So all these government departments have is part of the committee, and we use their regulation to actually regulate and monitor and also penalize any operators that actually do not comply with any developments in the across the sector. We also mentioned the upgrading of the attraction sites. The upgrading of the attraction sites, it's as I mentioned before, developing a product. Actually, it's not just focusing in the accommodation sector. It's actually looking at the adventure as well as the activities that comes as a package together with the accommodation. So, as I mentioned, we've actually received funding from the government of New Zealand to actually upgrade some of the attraction sites. If you look at the way the upgrades work, it's actually ensuring that we do not impact any cement or any major construction works to the site, but actually improving the site in terms of some of minor works that we look at protecting the sites, especially this is Afua'au at Palauli. I believe that some of you already been to Afua'au. It's one of our postcards waterfalls. Afua'au 4 years ago, you barely access Afua'au due to the erosion from the river as well as some from the mountain. So it's quite a difficult place to actually maneuver in terms of if you go by car. So under the tourism authority as well as the partnership with the New Zealand governments, we've actually improved the products in terms of increasing the exposure of our tourists to come and view the environment of Samoa and also the economic benefits on the village at Wailoa Palauli. So these are some of the upgrades in terms of attraction sites and using some of the, we actually use the EIAs in terms of development just in case. And also we've actually impacted on using the training workshop with SPRIP as well as MNRE. So in conclusion, that we are at unprecedented times, and I understand that the majority is thinking that tourism is out, but to us, this is the time to actually breathe, recuperate, let the environment recover. And now it's time to actually build up the products, fix and upgrade some of the key areas for the tourism. Now it's a time to actually that we don't have international tourists, but now we're actually working towards in upgrades and preparing some of once the borders are open. So all in all, I believe that's already presented the groundworks in terms of the work that's been carried out by Samoa Tourism Authority on behalf of the government in terms of its role as well as its efforts in assuring that the development of tourism actually aligns with what SPRIP is actually doing, as well as the MNRE.
Thank you very much, Mr. Suifua, for sharing with us some local experiences on what sustainable tourism is all about. And congratulations too to the excellent projects that the Samoa Tourism Authority has been working in partnership with the government in trying to raise the profile of this beautiful Samoa to the international market. There has been lots of questions coming in from the audience internationally and also locally. And it's time for questions. And I understand that, yes, there will be 10 minutes allocated for questions. And I have an interesting one. And it's in line with the concluding remarks by Mr. Suifua, where they are resting now, recuperate, and prepare tourism for international market. But the question is directed to what about domestic tourism? Is there any potential? Is there any potential seen in Samoa or Fiji or for the Pacific Island countries in promoting domestic tourism while awaiting for the opening of the borders? I leave it to the panel to share their thoughts. SPTO and the CEO and Mr. Philip, please. We'll start with SPTO first, with Mr. Swifuap.
Oh, thank you, Jope.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jope.
Thank you.
I wanted you to ask that question. As I mentioned, when it comes to tourism, the bulk of the works actually looks at the international markets, but we never left out our domestic market. And at the time being, that's the only option that we have. It's the domestic market, and I know that the majority of the hotels, as well as the service investments, we cater towards the costs as well as the prices, the amounts that to our international tourists visit. But our local, the domestic market actually provides, and they can actually sustain at the meantime. Because if you look at it in overall, domestic market is the only one that we have at the moment, and there's a lot that we can do at the domestic market, and it's one of the encouraging things that we've actually worked together with our other Pacific Island National Tourism Office is actually tapping into the domestic market from the Samoa experience. I believe that you've watched the KUKA program. The KUKA program is, as I mentioned, that not only looking at the accommodation, but we look at farm to table, and using our own cuisines as well as our own culinaries is actually one of the key areas that we can actually encourage our own people to actually visit the hotels and try some of the menus that they can actually prepare from what it's been available locally. We've also been doing a lot of promotion in terms of encouraging all the locals to actually have time to visit a hotel, experience it. We've also done a lot of we've also have a new program coming up to actually showcase some of the key attraction sites. I believe that some of the Samoans haven't been to it. So there's a lot of themes that we can actually tap into, and we believe that we've been doing at the moment actually working for us. That we can actually encourage our locals, visit Savai, visit your family, try this, try that. It actually works for us. I know that at the meantime we wanted to sustain, but through that we actually have to work together with the domestic market. One of the challenges, as I mentioned before, is once we had the COVID as well, the MISO, the biggest issue with tourism is unemployment. And by keeping the business alive, it's not only the hotels, the restaurants, but also attraction sites, we need to have some sort of funding so that we can actually, for them to actually maintain the sites, get some economic incentives. And also, it's a mean of actually maintaining until we have the border closed. But from the Samoa experience, the domestic market is the market that we're actually tapping at the moment, and it works for us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Suifua. We would like to hear thoughts from Mr. Philip and regionally from Tina, please.
Can I just talk about what we're doing at Lilibia?
Thank you, sir. You may go ahead.
Okay, we've been open right through the lockdown period, and Tourism Fiji have started a Love Our Locals promoting all the businesses, all the tourism properties that are currently open, and encouraging locals to travel. And we're finding we still have a lot of expatriates based in Suva, and we find that a lot of them are still traveling, particularly to areas in Fiji which they haven't had a chance to visit. So yeah, local tourism is a great opportunity to get our workforce back to work again, get some money back out to the communities, and it seems to be working for us, at least the smaller operators that are able to open. So we're very fortunate to have that right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Philip. Tina, would you like to share your thoughts on the question?
Yes, thank you, Chope. I do agree with what CEO of STA has said, and also Colin. It is a great opportunity. It's an immediate solution, and probably looking into the short term before we open our borders again. but the benefits will greatly vary across the countries. So definitely for Fiji, because it's the biggest, tourism destination in the Pacific, we'll see Fiji benefiting more. And as Colin had said earlier, there's still a lot of expatriates that were still here working in Fiji. So it depends really, it changes when we look at the other smaller countries and how they're trying to promote domestic tourism. I think the important part also is that, during these times, we're seeing businesses and governments being very flexible. And so they're adapting to the situation as we go. And we certainly hope that more and more of our Pacific Island countries are benefiting from domestic tourism, and that other partners who can support the revival of the domestic market can come on board and support the private sector and government's efforts as well in this case. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the excellent responses. And there is also another interesting question here, and it picked on from the few elements of presentation today, which focus on monitoring. And yes, it was picked out that this is one of the weakest area within any government. And from the industry, from the tourism industry, how can this be strengthened when we monitor tourism operation, especially in terms of environment impacts of these facilities towards the environment? How can this be strengthened? Tina, would you like to go
thank
first?
You. Yes, I think with our experience in establishing that monitoring program for the accommodation sector, we've learned that in order to have a really robust monitoring system in place, we do have to look at the industry and the systems, data collection systems that are available, and it varies across countries and across the industry. So we've noted that, for example, some of our accommodation properties are still using manual data collection systems. So investment really in lifting the standard of data collection systems in the industry will be very crucial, because that's where the data will be coming from. Alternatively, we should also be looking at alternative sources of data. Maybe governments and government agencies really need to be working together and look at the potential of sharing data for the sector. It won't give us the detailed industry level data, but at least it'll give us, a baseline to start from. So for example, in terms of energy consumption, we could work with the Electric Power Corporation in Samoa to look at the, tourism sector's consumption. At least we have that kind of baseline data to start off with. But yeah, when you're looking at involving the sector and individual industry members, you really need to invest in improving data collection systems, but also on training and capacity building, because we need to support the private sector in that respect as well. Noting that, probably over 90% of our tourism businesses in the region are small, medium enterprises. We have to be thinking about the capacity of private sector to be able to continuously and consistently provide that data. So they need support in that area. So it's not so easy. And that's why we need to be really looking at a proper plan on how we can, bring everybody together, talk about the challenges and analyze those challenges and find solutions on how we can capture the data that we need to inform our planning processes. But we do recognize as well that there's a lot of effort from SPREP in terms of working with the countries in putting together environmental data through your SOE reports. That's very important for us in the tourism sector. I guess the next steps will be involving the tourism sector in understanding what the reports are saying about the environment. So a lot of awareness around how we can utilize that data and, provide training support, for us to be able to utilize that existing data that's there already on your portal. Yeah. So thank you. Those are some of the things I can think of right now.
Thank you, Tina. Thank you, Tina. And the three gentlemen, would you like to contribute to that
Can I
question
just
on how
add to
we
that,
strengthen?
to what Christina has said? I don't think that we can be very stringent at the beginning when we start a monitoring program. It needs to be voluntary. It does put some demand on properties because they've got to have the workforce and the trained workforce to be able to provide the data to monitor. So, to begin with, if we do it on a voluntary basis and we provide rewards for incentives for monitoring, then it can slowly take hold and be spread through the whole industry. Thank you.
Mr. Sifua?
I believe that Tina, as well as our fellow colleague, has already touched on the key areas when it comes to data collection. So follow through from us. One of the things that we need to actually look at from our implementation level is that you can have all the data you have, but if you don't have the initiative to push from the national level, for example, from the tourism, it won't work. You need to actually be consistent in terms of the monitoring. And I believe that if you have the set tool as well as the standards, the guidelines, and also the whenever you have to do the measurements, it's something that you need to work together with either SPREP or SPTO. The regional office has to keep on reminding the national officer as a reminder in terms of what they actually need to do, but also in terms of what they actually need to enact in the future. So it's a matter of having the right tools, but also the intention as well as the proactiveness of the government agency to ensure they do the monitoring. For us, believe that because we have different case studies. For us, for accommodations, we don't give them any sort of if you actually do not comply, we'll give you the first warning, second one, and then we actually remove you from the list and remove your business license. It's just simple as that. If you keep on giving them opportunities, they will keep on playing. So that's just the most easiest language to use. We need to actually stand on the ground and ensure that we actually implement. We can also give the incentives where they actually been in compliance with that. But there are some of the operators that through years, if you give them like how many years, the chances, they still don't see the importance as well as the implementation of the regulation. So overall, we have different cases where we can actually give incentives, but we need to actually be stringent on the way we monitor. And so if you're stringent on the way we monitor, so that would give them the incentive that if you don't do this in terms of your waste as well as the wastewater, whatever sort of utilities that you've been using, as well as the waste management, if you don't give them anything in terms of fines, they'll still keep on doing it. So it's a matter of ensuring that we have a certain period that we give them time to actually prepare. But we need to actually implement. You have to actually stand on the ground and ensure that these regulations are done to ensure the sustainability of the operation, but also looking to the future.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Sifua. Audience and colleagues, time has caught up with us. Time has caught up with us. And yes, there has been hundreds of questions coming our way with regard to the presentation and delivered by the speakers. But we are so fortunate that we have the Director General of SPREP here with us. And we briefed him earlier on is for him to ask the final question. But instead, he can give the final remarks or continue with the Talanoa. Director General, thank you again. And I think just a final word of wisdom from your table. on why is sustainable tourism important for the region. Mr. Leota, please.
Well, let me first of all thank all the speakers for what I thought was a very useful exchange this afternoon on a topic that's not only relevant, but so important for us at this juncture of COVID-19. So thank you very much for your useful insights. There's much that has been said in terms of, I guess, some useful lessons learned and perhaps some useful comments in terms of moving forward. There's probably one or two things that just like to perhaps maybe just reinforce. These are things that have already been said. But I think one of the things that I keep hearing, but like to see that perhaps addressed in the context of COVID-19, and that is, I guess for us as a collective, when I say collective, I mean government, stakeholders, tourism sector, NGOs, people at large, and that is to build back better in terms of post-COVID-19 recovery. But the question that is raised by that comment is, what does that look like? And I think it's important for us to think about building back better in terms of COVID-19. So it sounds like a statement, but I think there's plenty of questions that are actually in that statement. And so it's a question for all of us, or a statement, however you look at it. I think what we've heard is that we agree we need to build back better, but what does that look like? What does that mean? We've heard a lot about the, EIA as a effective planning tool. I think that there's been some comments about whether that's, it's a tool that is just simply being used simply to delay the inevitable, or whether it's something that's used truly as an effective planning tool. I guess we just need to look at our experiences and then make up our minds and make our judgment on that. But it does not take away the importance of the EIA process. There's nothing wrong with that. It's how we use it that really is the question that we need to ask. And I'll finish with the last point that was, I think, an interesting point that was made, I think, by Christina. You talked about a new vision for tourism in the Pacific, and that's important. And how do we build that new vision for tourism in the context of placing sustainability at the heart of our recovery? So I guess that's linked back to the first point that I made about building back better. But what does that mean? How does that look? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director General Leota Kosilatu. And I think it's just proper for us, and it is right for us to thank the speakers, to Ms. Christina Ngale, Mr. Colin Phillip, Mr. Suifua, and of course, Gregory Barbara. I think the audience and SPREP as an organization take this time to thank you sincerely for putting your effort and time to come and share with us on the topic that has been discussed this afternoon. And also I must thank the SPREP team and the SPREP technical team for connecting us with Fiji and Samoa and to the world. And apology if there are some glitches earlier on, but there has been some information from Coconut Wireless. There will be series 2, and we'll be able to improve on that in series 2. And one last message from the moderator. One last message from the moderator as a steward of environment. Let us save the environment and the people with respect and humility. Thank you. Pinagabolewu and Soifua.
Thank you. Hello. Naka. Well done, moderator.